this could be. All right. Well, welcome back. Good morning. So we're kind of at step 8. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes.
So made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all, and then actually made the direct amends. I like this idea of becoming willing. It's a shift in thinking from control, right? And we find it a number of times in the steps, the idea of a willingness. When we're busy holding on to everything ourselves, trying to control it, so we're not really willing, right? It's giving our will over. There's a passage in the Mishnah that says, "Make his will like your will, so that he will make your will like his will." So he will make your will like his will, which can mean a lot of different things, but in a very basic way, it means thy will be done, right? What is my will? What is it that I want? What I want is to do what God wants, because the ego I, is susceptible to self-interest, and self-interest oftentimes brings us to dark places. So if I make God's will my will, right, God's will becomes the driving force, and we never lose our consciousness of self, because we're human beings. We have this animal soul, which we discussed at length last week. So we never lose our consciousness of self. So it's an ongoing journey of having this willingness to give our will over, to let go of our will, to make God's will our will. So there's this ongoing journey of willingness. So all of these amends also play towards the ego, right? I mean, I think ego is a fundamental underlying inflated ego is an ongoing. Sure. You can prop it open a little bit. It's fine.
Okay.
The inflated ego is the root of all of the addiction, and it's where control comes from. It's where resentment comes from. It's where self-righteousness comes from. It's where an unwillingness to give our will over comes from. It's the root of everything. So what happens? What is the famous saying? Is it from Gabor Mate that the opposite of addiction is connection? Is that where it's from? Have you heard that line?
Interesting.
Have you heard that line before?
Yes, but I thought that was Rabbi Cal. I have heard something like that. And that's what we're seeking. We don't realize it when we're in active addiction, but we're seeking a feeling of connection. So that's neat to hear it put like that. So, yeah.
It's here. Google anyway credits Johann Hari, who I have no idea who that is, but he said it in a TED talk. But regardless, the messaging I think is correct, that both on account of where the addiction comes from. In other words, when we usually say the word ego, I think people throw it around meaning arrogance, right? It's not the same thing. Arrogance is an inflated ego. Ego is a necessary part of a healthy human being. But the question is, where do I get the ego from? Where does it come from? What gives me a sense of self? Is it me, which loosely, when you hear the expression ego is edging God out, that's not a consciousness of self. It's that myself is important because of myself, right? When my ego, which is the consciousness of self, is aligned with God, then I'm not edging God out. And then that's healthy ego, which is really, I'm just a conduit. I'm a channel. There's an I, right? Because if there's no I, then as we say in Yiddish, you're a shmata, you're just a rag, right? There's no value to you. And you can't, if you're just something that people step on, then you have nothing to bring to the table. And that's not the case, right? We all have something to bring to the table because each of us were created uniquely. Each of us are created in God's image. We each have something to bring to the table. But what we have to bring to the table is because God gave that to us. So it's when the self gets involved to the exclusion of God that ego becomes inflated. So unhealthy ego looks like arrogance, and arrogance is also just one side of an insecure coin, right? So when somebody is insecure, they also can act arrogantly. It's not necessarily because they have any substance to back their arrogance, and they're fighting for value. They're fighting for recognition. I feel like such a nothing that I'm going to try to pretend that I'm something so that I can feel worthwhile in some way. So what happens is the ego drives the addiction. The addiction drives disconnect from relationships, and we have to work in reverse. We have to create connection in order to have a sense of self. That connection is obviously at the beginning is first with God, is to recognize that our true value comes from God, and then with other humans, right? We have to have people in our lives, spouses, parents, children, siblings, friends. And what happens as a result of the addiction is we create disconnect with all those relationships. Our actions create barriers there. And we can stand on ceremony and say, oh, I don't need you anyway, right? But that's not really true. Now, there are some people in our lives that are not good for us to be in a relationship with. But it's not that I don't need you, right? It's you're not healthy for me. But there are other people that we absolutely need to have. We can't live in isolation. That's not a healthy human being who lives in isolation. But we have to approach it from a healthy standpoint, which is I'm here for connection. I'm here to love, not be loved. I'm here to bring something to the table, to be a conduit for God's will, and so on and so forth. But before we do that, we gotta fix the mess that we made, right? We gotta fix the mess that we made, and that's where the amends come in. And in Jewish tradition, there is 3 stages to what we call teshuvah. Teshuvah is loosely translated as repentance, more deeply translated as return. Repentance connotes that you've done something bad that you need to now correct. Return connotes that we want to have deeper connections, right? I can leave home to go on a business trip and I'm returning home, right? The distance makes the heart fonder. I'm returning home. There's nothing negative in the story, but the return is an intensifying of a relationship. Mm-hmm. So in this case, when we talk about amends, doesn't need to be that somebody has messed up royally, right? And not everybody in addiction has made such a terrible mess. Some people have, some people haven't. But it's not about the size of the mess or how serious the mess is. It is, in a sense, about returning. It's saying, look, we're in a relationship. I know I haven't shown up as good as I could have in this relationship, right? Yes, if I've harmed you in this relationship, I need to apologize for that and make amends. But if I haven't harmed you specifically, in a sense, I've harmed you because I haven't really lived fully in this relationship as I could have, right? Let's think about it in the context of God, right? If we're not being connected to God, even if I don't do sin, I haven't done anything wrong, but I have this gift of this relationship and I haven't nurtured it, in a sense, that's something wrong. And I have to make amends for not having lived more fully within that relationship. So in whether we look at it as repentance or as return, there are three kind of steps in Jewish practice for how one does teshuvah. The first is regret. The second is resolve to not do the wrong again. And then we have to bring a gift. Now, what does this mean? So the regret is that we we feel bad about what we've done, like authentically, truly feel bad. We resolve that we're not going to do it again. And then the gift, I'd like to say that the gift is a form of amends. Now, it doesn't mean that you actually have to bring anything, but what you're doing in the amends, if amends are done correctly, then what you're doing is you're smoothing over. Now, if you're not authentic in your regret and resolve, the gift is not going to mean anything. The amends is not going to mean anything. Now, sometimes people don't want your gift. Sometimes you've heard people and they're not prepared to receive your gift. Okay, that's you go home and you look in the mirror and you say, did I really show up authentically? If I did, then I can be at peace knowing that this is also part of the master plan, as we discussed last week. If I didn't, I have to work deeper and try again. But at a certain point, you dig deep enough and you do show up with enough authenticity. And, sometimes that's what happens. Life, sometimes we damage and you can't fix everything. It doesn't mean that you're not a worthwhile person and can't move forward in your recovery. And that's their journey that they have to go on. So what are the obstacles to this willingness to make amends and making amends? So one of the obstacles is our own self-righteousness, right? This notion that we didn't really do something wrong. So hopefully at this point in one's journey, working with a sponsor, you have an objective mirror that's being held out to you to kind of say, hey, you're just fooling yourself, right? And remember, there are so many layers to our consciousness, and there's so many layers to our ego that, sometimes we come out of the gate very strong, like, I didn't do anything wrong here. And then what ends up happening is that, the next day you look at the situation and say, maybe I did. Maybe I was just looking at the situation wrong. Maybe my ego was getting in the way. And then as time passes, you begin to, as you have more awareness, we're able to show up in those very same situations in with a much healthier perspective. Because the reality is that your perspective is what feeds your ego today. It's the story that you've told yourself and about that other person and about the world and about life and about God and about everything that creates the framework of your defensiveness in the particular situation. And as time goes on, we become willing to look at our story differently. We do get insight into our story, and we're able to look at the same situation from a totally different perspective. So perhaps on some level, we've shown up and made the amends at some level today, but in the future, we may have a totally new perspective that will actually allow for us to show up differently, which is really perhaps a little bit what step 10 is also about, is not just when we mess up again, which we're all inevitably going to, but when we have deeper awareness about even the things that we've done in certain healthy relationships, right? If, you don't have to necessarily go back to your college roommate who you already made amends 10 years ago and go back and bring up old stuff again, right? Everybody's moved on with their lives, but maybe people that you're in a deeper relationship with, it's okay to say, hey, by the way, I've come to this new awareness, and I just want to say, I realize on a deeper level today that when I did such and such, or behaved in such and such, or my attitude was such and such, that it really sucked. It was really not nice. It was really my ego speaking. It was really, I really hurt you. It's okay to do that in with someone who you're in a deep, meaningful, ongoing relationship with, because that shouldn't hurt. That should heal. That should bring a deeper connection and a deeper bond. So the first kind of barrier is our own ego and delusion about the situation. And sometimes we actually are right. It's important to know that just as we may have parts of us that are unhealthy, that have done harmful things to other people are also unhealthy, and they may have done things to us that are really wrong. So the first thing is let's get clear about what is what. And that's where we have the voice of our sponsor and others who say, yeah, you know what, that person really did something wrong. So then how do we move forward from here? How do we make amends in such a situation? How do we navigate that? So there's a truth that even when somebody does something wrong to us, we may also have reacted in a way that wasn't right either. That doesn't excuse what they've done wrong, but we still have our contribution to the story. Again, it doesn't let them off the hook at all. It doesn't excuse them in any way, but we've contributed to the story, either in the lead up, and this is not blaming the victim. It's because we're talking about personal development here. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, what did I bring to the table here? And recognizing that we contributed something either on the front end or on the back end when the event actually occurred. But then we can actually look deeper within ourselves and say, why can't I let it go? If that person is wrong, why am I so caught up in it? What's holding me back from letting go of this resentment towards them? So why is this so difficult to do? I remember the scenario where somebody had some major resentment. I read this or I heard this in a talk somewhere where they had major resentment towards someone who truly wronged them. And the sponsor told the individual in recovery, just why don't you go and make a donation in that person's honor? Not because they deserve it, but because you, the person in recovery, need to get past yourself. In other words, what happened to you is part of a master plan. Again, going back to what we spoke about last time, I think is so critical to healing, is to say, look, I was born with certain genetic wiring. I was born in a certain family. I was born with certain circumstances. I'm not blaming them for who I am, but I have to recognize that I was shaped by these different things. So if I want to move forward, I have to let go of the control. And if something happened to me and that person is absolutely wrong, I don't have to hold on to it because I'm aligned with God. I've surrendered. I'm on this journey. And the question is not why, but what am I doing with this? What am I doing with this experience? And I don't have to make it about that person. Again, we have to have clear thinking. If this person's bad in my life, I need to distance myself from them, but without assassinating them, without constantly chewing over how terrible a person they are. Just move them out of your life. Just remove them from your consciousness and focus. And if we can't do that, then it's back to us. Why are we holding on so much? And finally, there's this interesting idea that when we hold on to the resentment, we actually are we continue to cause them harm. Besides causing ourselves harm, we actually cause them harm spiritually. There's a book called Hayom Yom, which has a thought for every day of the year. It follows the Hebrew calendar. It was written by the Lubavitch Rebbe. And the passage for my birthday, which is the 29th of Tishrei on the Hebrew calendar, has a story. There's not a lot of stories in this book, but it's insights. They're beautiful ideas. But there's a story on my birthday, and the story is of the Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of the Hasidic movement. One morning after services, two of the members of the congregation were fighting with each other. They were sparring with each other, and one of them said to the other one, I guess back in the day, this was like a pretty serious curse. He said, "I'm going to tear you apart like a fish." That was, if we did that these days, we'd be okay. But that's what he said to the other person. So the Baal Shem Tov gathered all the students around, as he was known to do this, and he had them go in a circle and put their hands on each other's shoulders, and then he would tell them to close their eyes, and then he would complete the circle. And in this state, this kind of meditative state, they were able to see spiritual things. And in this circle, they suddenly saw how in heaven, this guy was tearing the other person apart like a fish. So the the Baal Shem Tov said that words have power. And when we utter something, even if it's just a saying, it lands somewhere. It has an effect. So when we hold on to resentments, we actually negatively affect the other person. So it's absolutely incumbent upon us to work on ourselves to let go of those things, utilizing the tools of the 12 steps, utilizing tools of personal development, using personal spiritual tools. But we have the capacity to do that because the only reason we don't let go is because of our own ego. And if we can navigate that, we're able to move to a place where we can really let go of that and not carry that around.
Freedom.
Yeah.
When you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about freedom. Like we have to get free of it. So even if it means, like you said, something where you really were legitimately wronged, you've still got to get free of it. And give up that control.
Because as long as we're holding on to it, we're tied down somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
We're tied down to the lack of connection.
Mm-hmm.
There's one more reference point, and I'll share the link later. My roommate for many years in yeshiva, his father was a great writer. His name was Jay Litvin, and he became ill with cancer and eventually passed away. But he wrote an amazing essay. I believe it was in connection with Yom Kippur, about coming to forgive God. And he navigates this tension that he's experiencing, his anger towards God, his forgiveness towards God. And he likens it to a human relationship. And he says that, in a deep, meaningful human relationship, we can stand on ceremony only up to a certain point, because at a certain point, the connection is more important to us than being right. That's the way it ought to be when we truly have an awareness of our deepest self and recognize that in others. And when we are prioritizing being right over the connection, then we're stuck. That's our stuckness. Again, it doesn't mean, I want to be connected with that person who wronged me, even as I know that they are not good for me in my life. But the best connection I can have under these circumstances is not being resentful towards them, is having compassion for them, is praying for them, right? I could have a connection. It's not going to be the connection I'm going to have with my friend, who we're going to go out, to dinner together, and we're going to invite each other to each other's homes, and we're going to hang out together. We're going to study together. That's not possible with this individual because they're unhealthy. They have a lot of brokenness that's showing up in how they communicate to me and how they trigger me, and we're just not a good fit. But I don't have to carry that around. I can have compassion for them, and in that compassion, I create connection with them, and that connection ought to be more important to me. Like you said, I like the way you said that. It's the freedom, right? I don't want to be tied down. I don't want to be imprisoned to my own ego. So if I can let go of that, I can truly be connected. And I think it's demonstrated in that article beautifully. Hayom Yom. I can give you the link as well to that. Yeah.
Isn't there a Hebrew term for being tethered? You're thinking of Italian or Spanish, but
In what kind? Yeah, I mean,
like a spiritual term for being tethered to something, like bound.
Oh, very good. Yes. I don't know if you're referring to this, but in Hebrew, kesher means to be tied to something, but it has the same three Hebrew letters as sheker, as falsity. So maybe that's what you're referring to. There's the idea that you can have a false kind of connection, which is the delusion of connection when you're preoccupied with your righteousness. So you are connected. There is a connection when you're angry at someone and resentful towards them, but it's not maybe it's only a one-way connection. It's not a two-way connection. So just one thought on step 9, which I learned this in teaching the 12 steps some time ago, that, and I think this was very powerful for me, is that step 9 is not about, it's not about the amends. That's not the objective here. In other words, my goal here is not to make you feel good. Not that I don't have compassion for the wrong that I've wronged, but that's not the objective here. I'm owning my life right now. And owning my life means I'm keeping my side of the street clean. And I cannot control how you're going to respond to the amends that I make. You may be very receptive. You may not want, which is why when making amends is going to be harmful or hurtful, we don't make the amends. Because I have to live with that. But that's how I keep my side of the street clean, is recognizing that I did something wrong and I cannot fix it. I can't even get the other person's forgiveness, and I have to live with that. But that's how I keep my side of the street clean. So in Jewish practice, when you've wronged someone, you have to ask forgiveness. And in Jewish practice, you ask that forgiveness 3 times. And if after the 3rd time the person refuses, then you can walk away from the situation knowing that you've done your part. Again, the ego doesn't want to let go because you want to be assuaged, right? You want that person to say, I forgive you, because you want to be assuaged of the fact that you did damage, that you did harm. But if you're not going to get that, you've still done your part in keeping your side of the street clean. And that's what our job is now. It goes further. If the person dies before you have the chance to make those amends, it says you take a minyan, a quorum of people to the cemetery, to their graveside, and ask forgiveness there. So here, for sure, you're not going to get a verbal approval or forgiveness, obviously, but one can show up there knowing that they've done their part. Again, it's about the authenticity of saying, I've really done wrong. It's the regret, the resolve, and the gift, as we discussed before.
Thinking about that, like, there's someone that, a college girlfriend that just, she moved to England and she just won't. I sent her an email, asked if we could talk, let her know that it was a part of recovery and it's, really important that anyways, she wrote back something super generic, like, yeah, it's just crazy what's happening in the war in Ukraine. It was before the other stuff, but like, it was like, okay, she's just not receptive, but I will keep that in mind, the concept of 30 times, give it 3 times, maybe let some time pass in between. Is there any guidelines around or recommendations around the time in between?
Not specifically, but I would say also, you can make the amends by sending her a letter with the amends.
With the amend, okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't necessarily do that the 1st or 2nd time, but on the 3rd time, you can make those amends and say, look, I want to come clean, and this is what it is. And then what she chooses to do with that is her choice. It's out of your hands. You've done your part.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, I think that if we think about it, we want to get the validation, but that's not the objective here. We have to learn how to live with uncomfortable feelings, right? That's at the core of it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we're not living right because we have these uncomfortable feelings. That's part of the human condition. And the human condition is that when I wrong you and I ask for forgiveness, I want to get it. But sometimes the other person has the problem, and sometimes you're just not going to get it. And you've got to live your life. It doesn't, we just got to carry that around with us. Or not carry it around, work on being okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've done all this work, right? And now we're now moving into a way of life. This is a way of living, right? We've done all the hard work, and now we've cleaned up our act. We've done our act of surrendering. We've done our inventory. We've made amends. Now we've got to begin to live this life. So in step 10, we continue to take personal inventory. This is not a one-off event, but this is an ongoing practice. And just let's talk a little bit about what is this ongoing inventory. So a couple of different ideas. There's a saying from the Rebbe that the sign of a living thing is that it grows, right? Which means, what is the purpose of inventory? Purpose of inventory is constantly checking ourselves if we're going backwards and are we going forwards. It's not just that I mess up, but also am I growing? And if you're not growing, then you're dying. If we're not evolving, eventually you're going to fall back. I read this line somewhere. We need to eliminate yesterday's hangover of emotions. Inventory does that. Now we are better equipped to deal with tomorrow's challenges, but this is an ongoing process. So what are the inventories that are spoken about in the big book? We talk about a spot check inventory, end of day inventory, the occasional inventory with our sponsor, annual or semi-annual house cleaning, and then the occasional retreat. Those are the ones that I read in the big book or in the 12 and 12. So we have these in Jewish practice, built into Jewish practice. We have it in the morning, the Moda Ani, which we referenced in an earlier class. The first thing in the morning is this recognition. I have a job to do. What does my job look like today? In the afternoon, we have we interrupt our busy day with the afternoon service, which again is an inventory. After the Amida prayer, we have prayers of what's known as prayers of supplication. We ask God for forgiveness, right? So even though we ask God for forgiveness in the morning prayer, we're doing it again in the afternoon prayer. Before we go to sleep, this is particularly in Hasidic practice. Before we go to sleep, we recite the bedtime Shema, and we actually take inventory. It's a time to do spiritual stock taking. You know, how did I show up today? I'll read a passage. We'll read a passage from the opening of the evening prayer, the bedtime prayer, that I think is really.
That's what's so neat, is that the more I learn about Judaism and so even like what you just described, okay, I don't have a midday, but we're encouraged to continuously sort of check in, but especially if disturbed. But what you just described about morning and night, it's exactly what we're recommended to do. It's just wild. Something I'd never heard of. Maybe it's another like Christian faith too, whatever, but like I just never heard it being so sort of
there's structure.
do
there's
this.
there's a program.
This is important.
Yeah. So listen to this. Listen to this passage. I think it's just really, it's so 12-steppy, if you can say that. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me. Like this is, you're doing this on your own at home, right? Either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other. Any Israelite, may no man be punished on my account. May it be your will, Lord, my God and God of my fathers, that I shall sin no more, nor repeat my sins. Neither shall I again anger you, nor do what is wrong in your eyes. The sins that I have committed, erase in your abounding mercies, but not through suffering or severe illness. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Isn't that fantastic?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you've got this idea like built into our
covers all the bases.
Yeah. Now, it could be lip service, or you can really deeply think about this. And to say I forgive anyone who has, like, you know, it could be a little, you can at first glance, right? It doesn't start with asking God to forgive us for our own sins. It's asking God to help us, or actually making a proclamation, a statement that I forgive those that have harmed me, right? So you can say, well, that sounds a little arrogant there, right? I'm starting off like, somebody harmed me, so I'm forgiving them. I should start with my own sins. But if you think about it, before you can actually ask for forgiveness for your own sins, you got to work through that ego. And the ego is being caught up with those that have harmed me.
Mm.
And people who are preoccupied with themselves are always getting hurt.
Mhm.
It's not that other people don't get hurt. It's just they're not preoccupied with it. My wife and I were talking about an individual in the community last night who she was talking with that individual, and they made a comment about somebody. They said something to the effect that, oh, that person, he's a thief. I would never do business with him. And that's his experience of that individual. And I don't doubt that that's his experience. But what both of us said about the individual who made that statement is that he doesn't stay there. He doesn't get stuck there. He doesn't assassinate any community. A lot of people get stuck and say, oh, this person did that. They're all bad. That group of people are all bad. That's your ego speaking. That's not real.
Mhm.
No group of people are all bad because one person did something bad. There's no such thing. I mean, you sometimes see trends in communities, and you have to be wary of a community when you see trends in a community, but it still doesn't make everybody in that community bad,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But when you're not caught up in that, you're not caught up in yourself and your ego, you're able to say, look, that's an individual. He's not an honest person, but I'm not going to get stuck on that. I'm going to live my life. So it's, in a subtle way, I think it's really a very powerful commentary about people who are not caught up in themselves. So conversely, when someone's caught up in themselves, everybody's hurting them. They're always getting hurt. There's a great story from the third Chabad Rebbe, that Tzemach Tzedek. He said a person once came into his, he didn't say, but the story is told that somebody once came into his study and said, I'm out there in the study hall and everybody is stepping on me, right? Metaphorically, everybody's hurting me, everybody's offending me. And the Rebbe said to him, stop spreading yourself all over the place. People will stop stepping on you. Like if your ego is like all over the place, you're going to get stepped on. If your ego is in check, you're not going to get so affected just because somebody looked at you the wrong way, right?
I want to ask about something.
Sure.
The other day at a meeting, this guy went on and on forever, and it was kind of inspiring and kind of like excessive, but he talked in length about making amends to himself. And I had never heard anyone talk about that before. He looks in the mirror and he says, I'm sorry I hurt your mother. I'm sorry I did this and this and this. And what do you think about that?
It depends who the self is, right? I'm not sure how 12-step that is, but it's very therapy focused, which I've actually experienced in earlier years. And speaking with a therapist, the therapist wanted me to speak to my younger self, and I couldn't do it. I don't think I had the maturity or the perspective to actually have that compassion on myself. As I've gotten older and done more inner work, I've been able to talk to my younger self and have that compassion. And I think it's very liberating when you're able to look at your life in that way and look at parts of yourself in that way. So if you're looking at your younger self and saying, I'm sorry for what you went through, I'm sorry for the bad choices that I made, I think that can be very, very healing and very compassionate. It could also be very ego feeding.
Yeah.
It could be very ego feeding, right? So I think it's really, that's where the subtlety is. I've never heard that in the context of amends specifically, right? Do we have to apologize to our younger selves? I don't know. That's an interesting notion. I think we can have compassion on our younger selves. I don't know. One can speculate.
Maybe it's part of like, I don't know, I was just thinking about the holidays for me, like I said last time, stir up a lot of regret. Look, I wasn't a terrible mom, but there's definitely times that, I went out and like wasn't present, hungover the next day. you know, whatever, like very much preoccupied with the party lifestyle and whatever. So it stirred up a lot of remorse. Maybe it's like you said, like a therapeutic kind of thing, like kind of, okay, like I've got to forgive that person. I guess if we're lucky enough to live a long life, we might actually sort of be different, you know, live in different almost personas in different parts of our life, and being a parent is part of that phase of life that might be more time consuming and intense at one point. Not that you're not still a parent after they move out, but it, like, you've not doing everything so perfectly then, and instead of carrying the shame around, maybe it's shame work, or, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. I thought of it when we talked about you, when you said you pray in the morning and you say, I forgive those who hurt me, and it made me think like maybe sometimes you gotta clean the slate and make room for that ability to.
Yeah, and I would say in the context of what we spoke about last week about an animal soul and a godly soul, right? So who's the one talking? Who's making amends to? Is it the godly soul making amends to the animal soul? That doesn't seem right. But if it's the animal soul making amends to the godly soul, right, that makes sense to me. I'm sorry that I didn't give you the opportunity to manifest yourself fully, you know, that I made choices that held you back. But I guess what's uncomfortable about it is also discounting the role that God played in those circumstances, right? And that's where it can become self-pitying. So I think it's very delicate. It's very delicate. But I hear the point. It's definitely, I understand why it was interesting, inspiring, and perhaps excessive. So I get that. Okay, so we mentioned the bedtime Shema. There's the bedtime Shema on Friday night. So Shabbat, Saturday, Friday night through Saturday night is the Shabbat, and it's a holy time. It's so holy that we don't want to bring into the conversation the junk of the week. So if I did bad stuff during the week, and bad stuff is all relative, you know, I did some minor sins, I did some, you know, ugly things to people or whatever. That's not really Shabbat talk, right? It's so the bedtime Shema on Friday night, we actually don't say that paragraph. There's a couple of paragraphs that we skip out on Friday night, and the focus is actually on the spiritual side of things. So it's all positive focus. It's focus on who am I? Who am I really? Let's talk about the soul. Let's talk about my true identity. Let's talk about stock taking within the spiritual side of who I am. Am I living fully? Right. So during the week, it's like, what did I do wrong? Where did I create blockages? And on Friday night, it's am I exercising this gift that I have? How can I exercise this gift more profoundly? Right. So there's a positive focus there. Then, of course, we have Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, which is all about getting clean, getting straight, you know. And then
before when you're fasting.
Yeah, that's when we fast.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's the lead up to Yom Kippur, which is about we have to ask forgiveness of others. So there's a making of amends. And then on Yom Kippur itself, multiple times we have a confessional prayer. We actually say the confessional prayer 10 times, and we say it as a community, as a congregation, which is in its own way kind of a group, right? We're doing a group amends and so on. So again, the idea of at its core of this ongoing inventory is this need to constantly be evaluating. Are we growing? Are we creating blockages? A business that doesn't take inventory is going to find out that they're been in dreamland, right? They say the number one reason why small businesses in America fail. You know what the number one reason why small businesses in America fail?
Bad accounting? Numbers?
Cash flow.
Oh.
So you can actually be making a lot of money. No, but you can actually be very profitable, right? But if you don't have cash flow, because all your profit, right? This is a busy season in certain retail spaces. Some retailers only make their money during these months, right? selling holiday decorations, you're not going to make much money in March, right? So if you have imagine you have a store, right? You got to pay for your lease, and you make all your money in November and December, and then you use all that money in November and December. You're not going to be able to pay your lease until next year when you start making money again. So if you don't take inventory, both inventory, literally, what products do we have? What products are we selling? Where the money is needed? If you don't take inventory, you're going to have to close your business. So we can live in a fantasy about what is it that, yes, things are going smoothly. I haven't bumped into, I like to meditate at night. I like to listen to meditation. I like to fall asleep to meditation. And I find that when I listen to the meditation, when I fall asleep, I feel better the next day. And then suddenly I find myself, I say, I'm not feeling so good in the morning. And I realize I haven't meditated in 4 weeks. So I haven't been taking inventory, right? Had I been taking the inventory and said, have I been meditating? Like, otherwise the problem sets in and it's too late to fix the problem for today, right? You got to start working on rebuilding that for the future. So inventory is an ongoing thing. You don't want to find, and when we take the time to just pause and reflect and take that inventory, we suddenly say, I realize I haven't really spoken to this person in a while. I haven't checked in with that person. I've actually been showing up in an unhealthy way in this context, right? We're able to bring that to our awareness before it becomes a problem. And then, of course, on the positive side of the growth, to really constantly be moving forward. And again, just back to the point I made before, is that we're so susceptible to fooling ourselves, right? We're so susceptible to self-justification and self-righteousness that if we're not constantly checking in, we're liable to create a whole new narrative for ourselves that's not in line with a true reality. Okay, step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So prayer is a fundamental part of and not just a fundamental, it's the principal means of conscious contact with God. And a lot of people have a hard time with prayer. It's you're talking to a being that you don't see. So, and as they say, if you talk to God, you're religious, and if God talks to you, you're nuts, right? People start walking around, hey, yeah, God said such and such to me. So you got to be careful. But God does talk to us, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So where do we start? So prayer and especially in the context of AA is expansive. It doesn't mean you got to pull some liturgy off the shelf. AA's got plenty of prayers. The end of meetings, people offer their own prayer. The idea is that you're talking to God, that you're engaged in this relationship, and that you're constantly bringing God into your experience. It's not something abstract. So it could be, one should have a set practice of prayer and meditation, right? Because prayer is lip service. And if we take the time to meditate, then it's not just lip service, it's actually an expression of what we're meditating on. We say in our prayers, I think we actually said it at the end of that passage, may the words offered from my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing before you, right? So it's the meditation of the heart and the words. It's not just words. Sometimes we can't put enough feeling into the words because we're not feeling it. So then the words are important, right? It's important to offer the words even if the feelings are not completely there. But we've got to put the time in. So prayer is so taking time to use, whether it's the texts, but in our tradition we have the prayer book, and the prayer book is texts that give us a foundational starting point to engage in the conversation. So prayer has a couple of different, in Hebrew, the word tefillah, which is the word for prayer, has a couple of different translations if you break down the word. One is beseeching. So we're asking God for help. Right? Because we know we can't do it on our own. We've learned that all the way back before step one. We thought we can do it on our own. So that's why we were engaged in our addiction. When we let go, we found that God was helping us. So we can't lose focus of that. And that's one step of prayer, is beseeching God to help us. The second word of prayer is connection. So if there's any being that we need connection with, it starts with God. That's the critical and significant connection that we need. And then the third is judge or judgment, which is a time of self-analysis. To judge ourselves, not to be judgmental, but to judge, to analyze ourselves and how we're showing up in the world. So another kind of inventory takes place in the context of prayer as well. Now, we know that at its core, there's a codependency in addiction. And codependency comes when we make others God. So if we're making God God, then we don't have to make others God. The reason we make others God is because we find our worth in them or in service to them. That's where we find our value, our worth. But if we find our worth in God, and we find that through prayer, through the connection to God, then we see other people for who they are, whether it's a spouse, a child, or a parent. Is I don't find you to be God. God brought me into your life, or brought you into my life, so I'm here to serve. I don't know all the lines. I just know the love line. I'm here to love and not be loved. What are some of the other
St. Francis prayer?
I believe so.
I've had it written down for years. I can't think of it. It's a good one. To love rather than to be loved, or like to seek love, and to help.
This is
Rather
something
than-
that I relate to a lot with my daughter. I have an only child, first of all, which could be
How old is
part of
she?
the complexity of all of this, but 19. And so like and she's very moody. And she's very hot and cold, and when she's on the moody side, I feel crushed. And I know it's because
You're making judgment.
her action, my higher power, like I'm trying to fill this God hole inside of me
Yeah.
with how she feels about me. And I mean, it goes up and down all the time. It's like I can become an emotional wreck. One time she came home for Easter last year, and within 5 minutes of me being walking in the door, being so excited because she's home, I'm in my bedroom crying. Because she mouthed off at me about something or had some reaction that I didn't want. But it's so true that is me trying to find my worth in, and
Yeah.
it's like really.
I have the opposite problem where I'm the daughter and I resent how much my mother smothers me. And she finds she lives through all of us. She has 4 daughters.
At least she's poor.
Yeah.
I do that to the one.
Yeah. But I live with her, so I'm the one that she sees every day.
Right.
Or she doesn't always see me. We have like opposite schedules, but yeah. But I do have a codependency issue, and my ideology on that is, we're all, I'm a humanist. I feel like you can find God in other people, and I guess I just think about that. I guess I believe in that too much. Or it's so easy for me to surrender to what someone else wants of me rather than holding my own. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's compulsive at this point. But I'm getting more aware of it.
Yeah.
The journeys of life. So the bottom line in this topic is that making God be through prayer, meditation, conscious contact with God, we are anchored, right? We understand that the codependency, it sucks so much life out of us, and it creates inner turmoil for us. But if we're able to lean into God, lean into that relationship, and bring that relationship into our consciousness on a regular basis, then we don't have to make an other our God. We can see them for who they are and what our relationship is. We can be here in service. And now there's one danger in all of this that's really, really important. And in the pursuit of our ego, we can start pretending and imagining that God is, that anything that we think about is anything we want, or anything we think about is God talking through us, right? When we say thy will be done, sometimes we confuse thy and my, right? We become so convinced that we're plugged into our connection with God that what we want is what God wants. So again, this is, if we're engaged in the work and we're doing the work, we're going to have those people in our world who are going to keep us in check and keep our perspective, and not allow for our will to run riot, and that what we want, we pretend and imagine is what God wants and is God's will.
Do you think that the outward communication is encouraged? Not just completely conversations quietly between you and God, but sort of checking ourselves a bit is important. Is that
Yes,
what is part of the?
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned last time that Judaism doesn't have a practice of confession with others, but we do have a practice of having a mentor, and the purpose of the mentor, not unlike a sponsor, but like a sponsor, is to give us an objective perspective. The Mishnah says that one should make for themselves a mentor and acquire for themselves a friend. And the idea is that when you have a good friend, can call your BS, that is a game changer, right? When you have somebody who will say, look, you're just fooling yourself. And people that you're comfortable checking in with and saying, hey, look, I have a really good friend, and I called him last week and said, hey, I'm having this, somebody triggered me about something. And I said, I want to know, am I being petty? I haven't done anything about it, but am I being petty with these feelings, or is there something substantive there? And, just asking that question with somebody that you trust, so his response was, I don't think you're being petty, but I also think you need to find the right way to communicate that, right? Don't let it come from, you're upset, you're offended, but don't let it come from a place of being offended. Let it come from a positive place. So, just having that person to check in with is absolutely necessary.
Okay.
Obviously you have to respect relationships, and I wouldn't discuss something that's special to my marriage or unique to my marriage with any random person. I would discuss it with somebody like a therapist in confidence, or even something with my child, like maybe a younger child, you can be a little bit more freer because the issues aren't as serious, but an older child, you can't just have a conversation with somebody else in the community. And anyway, the point is that checking in with others is very helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Again, you have to be somebody you trust, right? You have to be somebody you trust that come on, you can sit in, or you can make yourself comfortable there, wherever you'd like.
That's honest. That's a spirit. That's like somebody who's also on a spiritual journey of growth.
Yeah, only because I wouldn't value their opinion otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want somebody if I'm on a spiritual journey of growth, I want somebody who has a moral compass.
Yes.
Right. Not just somebody, right? I wouldn't respect them otherwise.
Exactly.
Enough to be willing to share anything personal like that. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful people in the world, but if they're not invested in the spiritual compass that I believe in and that I'm journeying on, I don't know that I really want to get their advice, because their advice is you know, it's missing that component.
Yeah, okay. That's another commonality.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, let's wrap up with the last of the 12 steps. So, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Why is this so important? So, the first and basic idea is it's a practice that reinforces what's going on inside, right? When you preach a message, you gotta back it up. If you're a growing person, you're going to back it up. I saw a headline this morning. I saw it and I laughed. I'm checking on the news from Israel. I'll read it to you, see if you laugh. It's really funny. Putin to Netanyahu. War on terror shouldn't harm civilians. Like, really? Putin is lecturing Netanyahu on not harming civilians, right? So, but it's is he looking in the mirror? Is he looking in the mirror? Right? Is Putin looking in the mirror? And this is an apolitical statement, but don't talk about not harming civilians when that's what you've been doing for the last, what are we almost coming up on 3 years already? I mean, it's like, you got to be kidding me. You know, forget about that. I don't trust Putin when it comes to Israel at all. But, you know, so you have to have, when you're showing up and telling, you know, sharing your experience and wanting to, what do they say? Promotion, not attraction, not promotion, right? You've got to, like, are you a fool? You're selling something that you don't believe in. So you have, it reinforces what you believe in. And the more you do that, the more it reinforces it for you, which helps you stay on the straight and narrow. But that's a little self-serving, even though it's a good practice, right? I don't mean that really it's self-serving, because it's not. It's what you got to do. You got to brush your teeth in the morning, whether you believe in teeth brushing or not, because your teeth are going to fall out otherwise, right? But the other part of it is being of service, right? When we need to be of service to others, we go back to what we said earlier today, which is that the ego is the beginning of the demise, right? The ego is what ultimately drags us down. So if we have to be of service to others, we're always getting out of ourselves. And when we're getting out of ourselves, we are we're being a little bit less preoccupied with self. Beautiful story. There was a young woman who was in college, and she was having a difficult time making friends. And she asked the Rebbe what to do. And the Rebbe said, when you go to the cafeteria, when everybody goes for lunch, bring everybody napkins at your table. And her problem was that she was very wrapped up in herself. And by doing this act, she got out of herself. And that alone created bridges that she was able to now create connection. Sometimes we're having a bad day, wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Go and do something selfless. Go to a hospital, go to an old age home, go do something for someone. Because the reason why you're stuck in your bad mood is because you're back into the space of it's all about me. I don't feel good. My mood is bad. I have anxiety. Again, all could be true, but if you can get out of yourself, then you're not in yourself, and you can't be in two places inside your mind and heart at the same time in that way. Another important component to this step is, if I am sharing my story with you, it's in the hope and more importantly, the belief that you too can find recovery. So the idea that we can believe in another person is important to our own. Why do I believe in you? Because because you also have that part of God inside of you. So even though you may be a drunk in the street, there's hope. Why? Because you have that power within yourself. So if you have that power within yourself, that's the same power I have within myself. So if I'm believing in you, if I'm bringing my story to you, I'm reinforcing the belief in myself, not myself as this gentleman at that meeting, but belief in myself and my inner power, my godly power that's in me, that is my higher power, that I can continue this journey and find recovery. So what are the principles that we're practicing? They're humility, higher power, valuing the other, compassion, empathy. And it's not just practicing these principles in the space of recovery, but it's in all of our affairs. In our relationships, patience, health, financial stability, all the things that we struggle with outside of the actual substance, the actual addiction. And not only in negative things, which is not to let the negative things consume us, but also in positive things that we encounter in our lives, not to give ourselves that much preoccupation. Oh, look how smart I am, I was able to pull this off, but to recognize that we're only here because we have God's blessing and God's power, and we continue to bring these principles into all of our affairs. There's a line, and I think it's in the 12 and 12, that once you come to AA, you can never drink again. It doesn't mean that you can't drink again, but you can't drink again. Because you've tasted the experience. So there's a similar saying in regards to the Chabad yeshiva system, that once you've tasted, back in the old country, they used to have buckwheat for breakfast, right? So once you've tasted it's called kasha. Once you've tasted the kasha of the Chabad yeshiva, you won't die without repentance. And the idea behind that is that once you've entered into a spiritual journey, once you've become aware that there's more to life than just our initial consciousness, your life is enriched. It doesn't mean you're not going to be human anymore, but you're now in this journey, this tension that you can never escape from, in the best positive way, right? In the most positive way.
There's no going back.
Right.
Once you become aware that
Once you become aware, once you become aware that there's something more than our initial consciousness, right? Then you can never be fully happy just being caught up in the self.
Yeah.
Right. When we were caught up in self, we turned to addiction to alleviate the discomfort of being caught up in self, right? And all that came with it. But now we know that I don't have to do that. Even if I'm going to go drink again, I know that that's not, there is actually a better way. There is a way that's more real. There is a way that can actually navigate that in a long-term solution. Again, I'm not sure, remember where I read this from, and maybe in the 12 and 12, but missing from the steps is having become sober, right? There's nowhere, it doesn't say anywhere in the 12 steps, stop drinking, right? Why isn't that? Because AA is not about drinking. It is about drinking, but it's not about drinking. It's about being in a relationship with God. It's about being in touch with our higher power. It's about recognizing that there's something more to life, that I am part of a bigger picture, that all of these qualities of humility, higher power, valuing others, compassion, empathy, that's what it's about. And the result of that, yes, of course, you need to stop drinking to truly claim to be a member of AA, right? But that's what brought us through the door in the first place, was a desire. It's not even really a desire to stop drinking. It's a desire to not live in that tension all the time. I mean, it's the drinking that takes us out of our being alive. And we want to be alive. And being alive means being connected to a higher power. Being alive means that we're engaged with others, we're connected with others, we see others for who they truly are. We don't carry around resentment. All of these principles is what it's ultimately about. So thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity, and stay on the journey and keep working it. As they say, it works if you work it.
That's right.